My name is Robert Melso. We're filming from the Pro-Liberty Forum. Our guest today, again, is Dr. Thomas Giordano, and this is the fifth in a series of recordings and interviews, podcasts with Dr. Tom, who has written a book, Unalienable, What It Really Means and Why It Matters. This book was a bestseller on Amazon in the fall of 2020, getting great reviews. I encourage you to buy it. Now along comes his article, The Nuances of Abortion, What They Really Mean and Why It Matters. And Tom, you wrote this essay, why?
Well, I've seen recently, what sparked me to write this is that recently I saw in a few places in the United States, the anti-abortionists are trying to get laws passed to give a legal person status to the developing fetus. And I think this is a mistake. And that's one of the reasons that I wrote this article. Actually, it's an essay, a little bit long for an article. I mean, it's 17 pages. But I go into the history of it. And what I did, the approach that I took was the approach that St. Thomas Aquinas took in order to prove the existence of God, the Creator, not basing it upon faith. I wanted to eliminate faith from the argument and use purely natural and biological laws as the underlying reason to oppose abortion.
Let's get into the essay, and I want to ask you some questions. I'm going to try to pin you down a little bit.
Okay.
Be prepared, because I am tricky.
Oh, really? I've been married for 33 years. There's nothing that you can.
Likewise. Okay, here we are. Quote, the political process can give rise to legislation authorizing people in government to foist destructive laws onto a society. They generally sell these objectives with good or intentionable or good or reasonable intentions, and wind up creating a springboard for even greater evils under the sanctions of established law, end quote. Right. Explain that.
Well, how many examples do you want me to cite from history?
How about just 10 or 15?
10 or 15.
One will do.
One will do. Okay, we will. Let's look at the National Socialists under Hitler's regime in Germany. In 1939, there was a euthanasia project that was designed. It was called the T4 project. And basically, the good intentions that it had was to euthanize people who were suffering from chronic illness, were terminal, were feeble-minded, and basically they set up this bureaucracy to identify these people in their society, citizens of Germany, and put them into the program. And based upon a medical doctor's review, they would be put to death.
So that was their good intention.
That was their good intention.
What happened? What ended up happening?
Right. Well, it got to the point where even diehard Nazis believed that this was a heinous thing to do. This was initiated in October of 1939. That's when it officially started. With the beginning of the war in September, they backdated it to begin with the war in September 30, 1939. But what had happened was eventually they handed over the control of this bureaucracy to the German Psychiatric Society. Now, they officially ended the program in 1931, but they continued the program unofficially until the end of the war. When they handed it over to the German psychiatric organizations, they started using intelligence quotients as the criteria for eliminating people from their society. They set an IQ level, and anybody below that was inducted into the program and eliminated. Eventually, though, they started adding people's race. They started annotating the race of the patient. Now, what had happened was that this was officially ended in 1931. However, we must remember that the Wannsee Conference was in 1942. This program set up the infrastructure and the methods of elimination that was employed by their solution to the final solution to the elimination of the Jewish populations under their control in Europe. So it started out as a good intention, and there are estimates that about 250,000 German citizens were ended in this program. And then it went on to the elimination of political opponents, Jews and gypsies, and Roman Catholics, nuns. Anybody was fair game. Now, there's an interesting thing here. While Adolf Hitler and his group were sitting there talking about racial purity, the underlying criteria for this was usefulness to the state. So there were bean counters, statisticians looking at what people could produce for the state. And if they didn't meet their criteria, they were entered into the programs too. So they eliminated the useless eaters and the burdens.
That's what they called them, useless eaters.
That's what they called them.
Okay, let's back up a little bit. In this article, you say, quote, "I'll try to take the approach that St. Thomas Aquinas used in proving the existence of God the Creator. He used Aristotelian methods of analysis rather than relying upon religious faith." So you're
Right.
going to make the argument that you can use logic to refute the abortionist's view. Am I correct?
Yes. Well, I'm actually giving importance to the embryo by noting that there is a prime mover. We could see by what's around us that there is an intelligent design behind the universe. There's natural law. Natural rights come from that natural law. Whether you want to believe in God or not, you have to acknowledge the fact that there is natural law. And even if you don't want to believe in God, which is what I tried to eliminate from this discussion, and you believe in the process of creation, just the fact that we are a product of that process gives us our humanity and is the source of our natural laws and our natural rights.
Okay, well, you go on to say, quote, this is the strategy of the abortionists.
Right.
The strategy is a simple one, trying to force an otherwise primarily Judeo-Christian society to accept that unfettered abortion is either good for the individual woman, good for the individual family or society, or good for humanity, or perhaps even good for the planet.
Right.
It is shared by a coalition of organized groups that range from extremely radical to mildly permissive.
That's correct.
Now, what you're saying is that this strategy is pretty twisted.
Well, the objective is twisted. The strategy is pretty clever. The strategy is there. Look, there are things that you have to understand. When we're talking about leftist ideologies have to eliminate your humanity. They have to take your natural rights away from you. They've tried it by taking away God. They try it by any means that they can. Now, the first thing that you have to do when you're dealing with abortion is rid yourself of the, let's say, of morality and ethics and guilt in dealing with the elimination or the termination of a human life. The way to do that is, number one, redefine life. Number two, redefine fetus and and embryo. Number three, redefine pregnancy. And number four, redefine humans themselves. In other words, take the natural person argument away and replace it with a legal person argument. Now, this is the underlying agenda of these, let's say, the most radical people on this in these groups that are pro-abortion. It's not just a simple question of giving a woman a presumed right, which is no way, shape, or form a right, to terminate a pregnancy or to terminate a fetus. And this is the way to do it. You have to eliminate any kind of sense of Judeo-Christian ethics or morality as it applies to protecting an innocent life.
All right, let's talk about this definition of life, because you make a claim here that set me back. It actually startled me because I hadn't thought about this in this exact way. However, quote, returning to life and its definition, the next relevant question is when human life actually begins. And your end quote. And your answer to that is?
It already has. It already has. You see, this is one thing that both groups, pro and anti-abortion, get completely wrong. There are some people who believe it begins at conception. And, intuitively, you would say, yeah, okay, this person that's standing in front of me, his life began at conception. All right? And this is the natural person argument. There are other people who believe that it's some point during gestation. And then there are other people who believe that life begins at birth. The legal definition, if you were to look up in the US Code, the legal definition of life states that it begins at birth. The anti-abortionists say it begins at conception. They're both wrong. Life continues at conception. Life comes from life. It doesn't spontaneously generate 5 minutes before birth. It doesn't spontaneously generate some point during gestation. Life comes from life. And as a consequence, life continues at conception. It doesn't begin there.
Yes, and you've said in this essay that, quote, life is an information stream, transmitting intelligence or code through time. And so I see that you're being congruent with some of the other thinkers of our time. Stephen Meyer, in his books, The Signature in the Cell, talks about the supreme creator. Donald Hoffman, a particle physicist, talks about conscious agents. So you're basically saying that the genetic code is what is being preserved here. And to interrupt that code,
that's right, it is being transmitted. It's being transmitted that way. As a, it's very interesting, because if we were to look back in history, if you look in the Old Testament, if you look at in Genesis, for example, if you look at the Greeks, the Greek historians Herodotus and Thucydides and Xenophon, these people identified other people, the great people of history, by the code that they were transmitting. The Greeks had no concept of nationalism or ethnicity. They were identified by who their father was or who their grandfather was. In Genesis, for example, you have a whole series of begats. This one begot that one, who begot that one, who begot that, and they have these series of genealogical begats. But what they're talking about is the transmission of code through time. The reason that God gave to Noah to build the ark was to protect the seed of his family, the seed of the animals he was to collect. It was talking about protecting their code. So herein lies the purpose of life. The purpose of life is the transmission of code or intelligence through time in physical bodies. That's to be distinguished between the meaning of life. The meaning of life is something different, but the purpose of life is that. And it doesn't take a genius to figure it out. As a matter of fact, my undergraduate degree in zoology, it was one of the first things that we understood. We understood that when you're talking about life, you're not talking about an individual life form, you're talking about life, the entire concept of what it is to be alive. And, laws that are just vaguely informed by the biological sciences have absolutely, they can't change natural law or nature or biological law. Those things are what they are. Natural law is not mutable. Man-made laws are. Man-made laws are changeable according to the whim of men.
Well, I want to get back to this idea of the fetus being a link. So it's a link in a chain that stretches to the beginning of time for humanity and moves forward to the end of time. So when you interrupt that link, you have done that to the detriment of all the people who have suffered, died, struggled to bring that generation forward. And you're also denying the possibilities of who is to come and what they're to do, what contribution they're to make. So it's a very it's a decision of great import when someone wants to abort.
However, I have to correct you on one thing. You're right, it is a link, but it's not a link in a chain. It's a link in an inverted exponential pyramidal structure. It takes two people to procreate, not one. If we needed just a link in a chain, all we would have to do is clone ourselves, but we don't do that. We have a reproductive system that requires two people, right? Now, those two people came from four people, and those four people came from, it goes on and on and on. It's an exponential pyramid. So when you're talking about an individual embryo or a fetus, you're looking at a biological archive of tens of thousands of generations, probably involving hundreds of millions of people. Think about it. Think about it. You know your parents' names. My mom's name was this, my dad's name was that. If I were to ask you your grandparents' names, you'd probably be able to name them too. Well, your mom's mom was this, your mom's father was this, your dad's father was this. What if I get to your great-grandparents?
I think I'd be a little lost.
How about your great-great-grandparents?
No clue.
Great-great-great-grandparents. You see, it goes on exponentially backwards. And from that point of the fetus, it goes on exponentially forward. So you're talking about, let's say, an hourglass structure of hundreds of millions of human beings that are represented by that one embryo.
Okay. You in the article, I get that. You in the article go on to state, quote, the natural rights of the embryo are, by the nature of the process itself, present before conception. Then, further on, you say, it follows then that as soon as implantation in the endometrium occurs and the placenta forms, the embryo's natural rights are walled off from maternal rights. In other words, they are on equal standing.
Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. When you hear these people trying to convince you that they have a right to an abortion, no one has a right to an abortion. No one has that right. When they try to claim that fetus that's developing in them is them, my body, my choice, well, that's a specious argument, and it's a false argument, because the embryo that's developing in that womb is not her body.
And yet
it's this separate, distinct. No more than a son or a daughter is the mother. It doesn't work that way. As far as the natural rights, yes, the natural rights are present before conception. They're present before even before fertilization. They have to be. And the reason being is that both the mother and the father that are combining their haploid cells, the sperm and the egg, they have natural rights. And you can't delineate specific cells in their bodies and say, these cells don't have natural rights of an individual who has natural rights. Simply because they're haploid doesn't mean that there's not the potential of creating another human life.
I think
So,
I think one of my problems with this is that there are situations that we can all appreciate, and
yes.
where a woman is faced with a tough choice. It may be rape, it might be some other condition. And we have to have empathy for those times.
Oh,
So,
yeah,
so
no
what
question.
can, yeah, they may be faced with tough choices. And under what conditions would you say it is proper to allow for an abortion?
All right. Number one, we're talking about natural law now, not man-made laws, not nomoi, as the ancient Greeks would have called them. We're talking about natural law. There is one condition that a woman has an absolute right to have her natural rights trump the natural rights of a developing embryo. And that is if the pregnancy is potentially fatal to her. There's no question in my mind, according to natural law, that a woman whose life is being threatened by a pregnancy has an absolute right to abort.
When is there a gray area?
The gray area is with rape. I can see that under natural law, you may have an argument for abortion after having been raped or violated. A woman has an absolute right to share her code with whom she wants to, not against her will. If she is impregnated against her will, she may have a viable argument under natural law to abort that fetus. Now, but I would hesitate to say that it's a right in that case. I would say more an opportunity. Now, I'm not against abortion in total. I believe that abortion should not be banned as an absolute ban on the practices. It's a ridiculous idea. There are situations in which a woman may have her life threatened.
And yet,
even if you have that one absolute reason, then the practice should not be banned.
and
Okay?
yet here we are, after being told in years ago when this was first debated that abortion would be safe, legal, and rare. And now it's an everyday procedure. How did we get here, and how do we rectify that, in your view?
How we got here is a very nefarious strategy that was pushed on society by the eugenicists, progressives, people like Margaret Sanger and Goddard, who created things like Planned Parenthood. They basically convinced the people that it's a racist organization. Let's just put it that way. Planned Parenthood was the brain trust of people like Margaret Sanger, who was a dyed-in-the-wool racist. She was a bigot, but she didn't just hate blacks. She hated Roman Catholics. Who was unworthy to become part of American society? She wanted to eliminate the weeds from society. Now, what she did was brilliant. She conflated birth control with abortion, right? And made abortion, a cause célèbre. in her time frame. She got it actually legalized in New York State, and then it went from there. She actually convinced the Black population that it was a right that they had to eliminate their children based upon economic reasons. And they still use that ploy. So convincing people that they have a right to take another life is a neat trick.
And
And she was able to do it.
you've pretty much railed against both sides of the argument.
Right.
The pro-abortionists for being, for lack of a better word, morally bankrupt, and the anti-abortionists for being silly in the way they're approaching this. Their strategy, their tactics aren't working, nor will they work according to you.
Well,
what are they doing that's wrong, and what should they be doing?
Where they're going wrong, according to my view of this, is that they're losing touch with the natural person argument. The natural person argument is that our rights, our rights to the protection of innocent life and things like that, all come from the fact that we are natural people. We are natural persons. They are falling into the trap of trying to redefine us to protect the fetus as a legal person. We're not legal persons. We're not incorporated into existence. We're not ratified into existence as individuals.
The minute they accept that definition of a legal person, they're falling in the trap.
Exactly. They're falling into the trap of the pro-abortionist, because the underlying thing here is to do what they did with every other group that they took away their natural rights from. I mean, the German socialists under Hitler, they dehumanized their victims, but they never claimed that they weren't alive to begin with. That's not afforded to a fetus. That's a luxury the fetus does not have. And if you fall into that and take a phase of human existence and eliminate the natural laws in that phase, it's a foothold to eliminate it afterwards. Because for all intents and purposes, if you define a fetus as a legal person rather than a natural person, where does that end? Does it end with birth? Does it end 10 months after birth? How about your whole life? Isn't slavery the rejection of a natural person argument? I mean, if you think about it, you can't sell a natural person. That's what unalienable means. That's what unalienable meant to the founding fathers. It is not subject to commerce. It is non-transferable. That's what unalienable meant to the founding fathers. Not can't be taken away. They did the same thing with that word that they're doing with the words as it pertains to abortion. It's a very sly tactic, and I fear that the anti-abortionists are falling right into that trap. Once you concede them a foothold, they won't stop.
Okay, let's finish this up then. As a result of this essay, what would you like to see happen?
Well, what I would like to see is number one, the embryo, fetus, and abortum. I want to see them given protected rights under the Constitution. I want it noted in the Constitution that the embryo, the fetus, and the aborted fetus, the abortum, have natural rights and should be granted the dignity of human existence. Even the abortum.
Tom, if it's to be banned, what has to happen? If it's not to be banned, under what conditions is it allowed then?
All right, now number one, if we are to maintain having our form of government in a free society, the government cannot intercede into this activity. The only thing that a natural law requires is that people do not interfere, or they abstain from interfering in another person's expression of that right. If we were to concede abortion under strict circumstances, like threat to the mother's life, like a careful consideration on the subject of rape, okay? Because for all intents and purposes, the fetus is innocent. The fetus did not commit the crime. It is an innocent byproduct of that crime, okay? And there are ways that you could deal with, with an unwanted baby. We have adoption services. There are plenty of other ways, okay? As far as the fetus itself, if there is an abortum is the medical term for the contents, the fetal cadaver and the placenta, anything that's evacuated from, during that procedure. It's from ab ortum in Latin. Ortum is prenatal, or the unborn. Ab means from. So from the unborn, ab ortum, okay? So fundamentally, what I would like to see is a certain dignity given these human cadavers. Number one, I would like to see an amendment that guarantees natural rights to the embryo, to the fetus, and to the abortum, even after death. Number one, you do not concede it a legal person status. You don't want to do that. The government or the courts have no business interfering in nature, right? They can no longer write a law that will change nature than King Henry VIII could by changing his position in the church. Let's put it that way. So the fact is that, number one, give them a name at the time of birth. Give them a certificate of birth and death, be on the same day. Give them the dignity of a burial following the customs, the social customs of the mother or the father, or both, or the religious practices of both. Make sure that they are not dissected. There are certain things that I would like to see taken away from this issue, because there are too many in these groups that are pro-abortion. There are too many people making a profit. I'm not talking just from the procedure itself. There's the procedure, the environment in which it's done, the operating rooms, the buildings in which they're done, the ancillary machinery, the ancillary drugs, the payment of staff salaries and things like that, the doctor's procedures, chemicals, anything that you could think of, plus the sale of body parts, which is even more productive, more profitable than the procedure itself, okay? I would like to see that ended. It's a ghoulish practice, and it is an insult. It is a desecration of these bodies, of these cadavers. So even if they are cadavers, I would like to see them treated with human dignity. And the only way to seem to do that is to have a constitutional amendment guaranteeing, like our first 10 amendments, guaranteeing that they will be treated with dignity, as members of the species Homo sapiens. But on top of that, the government, if we are to maintain a government in a free society whose only roles are basically to protect our rights and our lives, right, from foreign aggression, from people internally and all that kind of thing, how could the government act in a schizophrenic manner to permit willy-nilly, upon demand, and late-term abortions? It's a fly in the face of what the government was instituted to do. In order to maintain that purpose, the government has to get out of it completely. The only thing the government has to do is not write laws effectively banning it outright. That's it. Everything else pertains to a societal response. Society will come up with the responses, the answers to questions, the solutions to personal problems. That's the role of society, not government. When you hand it over to government, you get Nazi Germany.
Okay, well, there you have it. The essay will be published shortly. We'll be in touch with where you can read this. And I want to thank you, Dr. Tom, for a very enlightening interview. And we'll see you next time.